This is the August 9th, 2021 meeting of the Evanston Plan Commission. We have a public hearing tonight for one plan development application. The zoning ordinance directs this body to hear applications for map amendments, text amendments, plan developments, as well as to make recommendations regarding the city's long-term plans. The commission will make a recommendation which will be sent to the city council. The first order of business is determination of a quorum. Ms. Jones?
Right. Commissioner Halleck? Here. Commissioner Hugo? Commissioner Johnson? Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Here.
Chair Lenoir?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, the next item on the agenda is approval of the meeting minutes from July 28th, 2021. We have a motion for approval.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from July
28th.
28th.
I'll second.
Okay. I have a couple of minor corrections on page 4 in the second paragraph and the third paragraph. Councilmember Kelly's name is misspelled, so I think that
Okay.
should be corrected. And similarly, on page 5, Mary Singh, it's S-I-N-G-H is how that name is spelled. And on page 6, Karen Singh, same spelling, S-I-N-G-H. And that's all I have. So there are no further corrections. I guess we can call.
All right. Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Chair Lenoir?
Yes.
Okay. Minutes are approved.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is plan development at 1012 Chicago Avenue, 21 PLND-0045. Stan Bernstein, did I pronounce that close? MCZ Development applicant submits for a special use for a planned development and a special use for dwellings multifamily to construct a 5-story mixed-use building with 5,822 square feet of ground floor retail, 116 dwelling units, and 58 parking spaces in the C1A mixed-use district. The applicant seeks site development allowances for 116 dwelling units where 78 are allowed. 2, a building height of 80.6 feet where 67 feet is allowed. 3, to reduce the required number of off-street parking spaces from 75 to 58. And 4, to reduce the required number of short loading docks from 2 to 1. The applicant may seek the plan, and the Plan Commission may consider additional site development allowances as may be necessary or desirable for the proposed development. So, let's see. I'll read this into the record just because I should, even though I see we don't have an audience. But the purpose of the Plan Commission and the public hearing is to gather facts and information regarding a petition, provide that information with a motion to recommend approval with refinements or denial to the City Council with minutes and exhibits where the final action will occur. So the process we follow is City staff will present a brief summary regarding the petition, followed by the petitioner, after which the Plan Commission may ask questions of the staff and/or the petitioner. Next, the members of the public can ask questions of the petitioner and give sworn testimony. After and then the petitioner will have the opportunity to answer any questions from the public or cross-examine any member of the public that provided testimony. After the public has completed its questions and testimony, that portion of the case hearing will be closed. However, any member of the Plan Commission and city staff may question any member of the public who has spoken regarding their testimony. And then there's a summary and closing by the petitioner and staff, at which point the Plan Commission will deliberate. And then finally, we'll make a motion on the matter. So, with that, I guess we'll go with the staff presentation first.
Right.
Good evening, everyone. This is Mike Griffith. I'm with the staff. And so as you briefly described, the project includes 116 dwelling units, a building height of 80 feet and a half, 58 parking spaces within a parking garage, and 1 loading dock. The site shown here is on the west side of Chicago Avenue between Main Street to the south and Greenleaf to the north. It's currently the Nissan Auto Barn dealership. The property itself is just over a half acre at 0.63. The overall floor area ratio of the building is at 3.98, where 4 is the max, so they do fall within what is permitted. And again, the building is a 5-story building, measured just 80 feet and a half to the top canopy portion of the building. The roof itself, the roof deck itself, is at a height of 61 and a half feet. And then the mix of dwelling units include 16 studios, 81 bedroom, 12 two-bedroom, and 8 live-work units. This is the site plan. In this orientation, north is on your right. Chicago Avenue is at the bottom. So this is looking down from the roof. The building itself pretty much occupies the entire site. The first floor is set back from the property line about 7 feet to provide extra pedestrian area at the ground floor. The upper floors cantilever over that. The upper floors then wrap around the site on the north, east, and west sides, leaving a courtyard on the west side. This is a detail of the landscape plan. Since most of the site is built, landscaping is pretty much limited to street trees and some landscaping in the private terraces and on the courtyard. This is just a layout of the parking garage on your left, and then the first floor on the right. The garage entrance is at the north end of the building, which is adjacent to a single loading zone. The residential entrance is to the south, with retail fronting along Chicago Avenue and a couple live-work spaces also fronting on Chicago Avenue. And there's floors 2 and 3. In the upper 4th and 5th floor. On the 4th floor, there are 2 balconies that do extend over into the Chicago Avenue right-of-way. And the Public Works Department might require some sort of easement, but that's at the 4th floor.
I'm sorry. Speak louder or hold on your mask. I didn't know what you said.
So on the 4th floor, there are 2 balconies that extend over into the public street right-of-way. So there might be an easement that might be required, but other than that, they shouldn't have any other kind of impact. The stormwater from those balconies will need to drain into the building and not drain into the right-of-way. And this just shows the roof plan, primarily decking, lounging area, and then a dog run, and part of it is covered with a canopy or roof. The project does comply with the city's inclusionary housing ordinance. 10 units are required and 10 are being provided, with 1 being a studio, 7 being 1-bedrooms, and 2 two-bedroom units. And that was with discussions with the housing staff, with that ratio mix. The applicant is seeking the following development allowances, the number of dwelling units, where 78 are allowed by the base zoning. A total of 129 are actually allowed with site development allowances and the IHO. They're coming in at 116. They're asking for a site development allowance on building height, where overall they're allowed 97 feet, and the overall building height is at 80 feet and a half. And on parking, where 75 spaces are required and 58 are provided. The required parking count excludes the IHO units. And then they're required to have 2 short loading docks, and they have 1. So overall, they fall primarily below the maximum allowed site development allowances that the code would allow them. In terms of public benefits, the applicant has provided a list of public benefits, specifically streetscape improvements that the city is currently engaged in, that planning process of a total of $15,000, a contribution to public parks of $10,000. Many of the others on this list, staff feels are inherent to new development, so not necessarily a public benefit to compensate for the impacts of new development. Staff is suggesting that these additional benefits be considered. Contributions to sidewalk improvements within a quarter mile of the site, streetlight improvements, again, within a quarter mile of the site, replacing street trees, again, within a quarter mile of the site, and possibly a park, a donation to the Fitzsimmons Park. And I think the rest of the slides, this slide lists the staff recommendations that are also noted in the staff report. Just some minor tweaks on the plans in terms of labeling things, just confirming the overall loading dock vertical clearance, coordinating street trees with the Public Works Department, and the streetscape with whatever streetscape plan ultimately is approved. A waste management plan that includes recycling and composting, a maintenance plan for the trees in the private areas, coordinating water and sewer utility connections. One thing the staff discussed at DAPR was restricting hours for the loading zones, since Chicago Avenue during rush hour, and primarily the evening rush hour, can get pretty hectic. The staff recommendation is to limit delivery hours outside of those rush hours and outside of early morning and evening hours. And then any mechanical equipment mounted on the roof should be screened. And in the event that there's a noise issue, that those measures are taken. And I think the rest are just the standards.
I have one question. Where is Fitzsimmons Park? Is that the one that's on Lee Street?
I'm not sure.
Oh.
I think so.
I meant to look it up and I didn't.
I think it's actually to the west. Is it?
I thought it was off of Greenleaf and Lee, to the south of, it's behind,
It's on Lee.
It's on Lee
it's
Street,
on Lee. Yeah, that's what I thought.
the 800 block.
Yeah, only to the west. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So
Mr.
I have several questions. You talk about dwelling units, but I assume these are rental.
Yes, the applicant is proposing rental.
It doesn't say anywhere, so at least I didn't see it. So just to confirm, they're rental units.
Yes.
Because they're small units, it makes sense. The additional parking, additional public improvements that the staff suggested, are you doing any of those?
The applicant can ask those questions or answer those questions. Those
Yeah.
are, the additional ones were just ones that staff
I know.
suggested.
That's what I'm asking. Are you, we've seen them. I'm asking, are you going to do any of them?
Why don't we hear from the applicant to speak? Because we've just heard the staff presentation, so let's,
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
so if we have questions for staff at this point, they would be appropriate, and then we can hear from the
I'm
applicant. How
so
about that?
sorry. I am so sorry.
That's perfectly fine.
I did have a question for staff, actually. I had read in the city council, one of the city council meetings, that I think they were going to do this to ask not the applicant to do a traffic study, but that the city would do a traffic study. Where does that stand?
I'm not positive where that stands right now. I know there's actually been some discussion about the city contracting out to have an independent
But it hasn't been
entity,
enacted
but it
yet.
hasn't been enacted, no.
Okay, all right.
And I have one additional question for staff. I know, I think it was in probably the Dapper minutes, there was discussion about the need to upgrade the water main serving the site. Where does that stand? And what's the issue with that?
I don't know where that specific project stands. The comment was brought up to make the developer aware that once they get into the construction phase, that those activities need to be coordinated. That was the comment in the staff recommendation about coordinating water and sewer utilities. So it's more of a heads up for the applicant.
Michael, how do you all feel about reducing to one loading dock, especially if you're going to restrict the hours for deliveries? How do you evaluate whether that's going to be workable for everybody?
Given the size of the building and the number of units and the amount of retail space, I think one loading zone should be adequate. I lived in a high-rise in the city of over 200 units, and we had one loading dock, and there was never a problem. Its usage is managed by the building manager. It's scheduled. So I think that's how it's done, is managed by the building to make sure that it's occurring at the proper hours and that there aren't conflicts in users trying to use it, like move-ins, move-outs for the residents, as well as retail deliveries.
Yeah, I think that might be neighbor concerns, that it's the building that needs to manage that, but understood. Also, anything in terms of the potential retail that might go there? Does the city have a sense of what that could be, what would work there, or anything you desire to see there?
We haven't had that conversation, and the applicant hasn't provided details in terms of who they think end users might occupy that space.
Along those same lines, I have a question about how the work-live deliveries might function, and whether or not the proposed work-live units that are shown on the drawings will comply with the requirements of the new work-live provisions that are at the city council at this point. I mean, it looked like one of the, in the staff memo, you said, the sizes would range from 500 to, a little over 1,100 square feet. And there's, I think, somewhere a requirement that a dwelling unit be at least 350 square feet. But the work-live or live-work requirements require that no more than 50%, or, less than 50% can be for residential. So I think at least with one unit, there may be a conflict.
Also, I in the staff report, I think I read that there was a statement that said that the live-work units were primarily residential. I didn't understand that.
In the application, the applicant indicated that the live-work units were primarily dwelling units that were intended to provide flexibility for basically what could be home occupations. And so the plan was reviewed assuming that those would be primarily residential
Okay.
units.
Because that then raises a question in terms of deliveries and, which it's not just the designated retail space, it could impact that, which again raises questions about loading and, drop-offs and pickups.
Right, right. I think the
With regards to the timing of it, this application was submitted before, I think, pretty well before we began considering the text amendment that has not yet been approved. So this wouldn't necessarily need to comply with those regulations on that end. But it is something that we do take a look at.
I mean, I would think that the live work would have very little impact on deliveries. I mean, just based on their size. I mean, these are not going to be large-scale manufacturers, large-scale retail establishments. I would think most things would be coming in fairly small cars or trucks, if not people just bringing in the stuff on their own.
Any more questions for staff? If not, thank you. We'll hear from the applicant now. And Mr. Griffith, could I ask you to get the sign-in sheet from the back?
Good evening. Do you mind if I take the?
I think-
Good evening again. My name is Nick Fatikas. I'm one of the attorneys at the law offices of Sam Banks, and I'm working with MCZ Development on the proposed plan development. I don't want to be redundant with staff's report. I was actually prepared to go through all the comparisons, but I think maybe responding to the 3 or 4 questions that were raised to give a little bit of insight from the developer side. So the first question that came up regarding the potential retail, obviously in kind of the recovery to COVID, the retail market is a bit uncertain. We're providing 5,822 square feet plus or minus of retail space that can either be divided into multiple spaces, or if an anchor tenant were to come in, have a larger anchor tenant within smaller retail spaces. But frankly, frankly, the market, when the building's delivered, will really control that portion of it. Commissioner, I think you had a point. With respect to the live-work units, the idea here is, again, somewhat in a response to COVID and people working from home more, and having the opportunity to have a low-impact type use and not have to pay a separate rent for an apartment in addition to a retail space. So similar uses that I've personally been a part of have been attorneys' offices, mortgage broker offices, realtor offices, something that has, again, kind of a low-impact, low-traffic impact on the building, and still, again, allows that operator to not have to pay a second rent for the uses. With respect to the community benefits component, we have gone truthfully back and forth with staff trying to find the right balance for what type of commitment we can, frankly, again, commit to, and know that there's no uncertainty with it. By comparison, there are a number of larger, bigger developments in the immediate area and then in downtown Evanston generally. But we thought that somewhere between a $25,000 and $30,000 commitment that could then be broken, whether it's to one program or broken up into multiple programs, we're open to that. But we don't want to be in a position where we overpromise the community benefit component, because the project financing, again, it is a little bit tighter. We're talking about 116 units. 10 of those units are at an affordable inclusionary rate. 8 are low income, or are intended to be live work. So the spread's just a little bit different than some of the larger developments that I'm sure this body has seen in the past. Still, that $25,000 to $30,000 range is something that we feel that we can commit to. We had initially proposed a portion of the money go toward the Chicago Avenue streetscape improvement. We're obviously going to be able to improve our section with the lining that Michael described along the streetscape. We'll also be making utility upgrades and improvements to accommodate our building. But in addition to that, we thought that would be a pretty cohesive use of the funds. And additionally, Fitzsimmons Park, we had left about a $10,000 investment for improvements, whether it's to The equipment, whether it's to landscaping, however it needs to be used or however it's best used, as determined by the Parks Department, we're open to making that commitment. I think that covers the 3 or 4 points that were raised during questioning. If there are any other questions on behalf of the applicant, I'd be happy to answer them now.
You may not want to go into this too much, but can you talk a little bit about the design for the building, which is a very aggressively contemporary design, and how the architects sort of tried to look at the neighborhood around it and complement what is already there?
You're absolutely right. I'm not going to go into that, but I am going to call Mr. William Hornoff, who's the project architect, to speak directly to that point. So, Bill.
Thank you, Nick. Do we have the elevations here? Are we? Can you hear me okay? Aggressively modern? I would say yes. It's certainly a modern building. So, I've talked about this. Maybe this is the best view. The analogy that I've talked about in the past is that the vision for this was a village on this part of the land. A village of apartments that we would break what might be, this is a 5-story building, so not a tremendously big building, but at 5 stories, presenting its long facade along Chicago, that by unitizing it, making it about the parts and not the whole, was a way of kind of connecting it to the density and sort of scale of the neighborhood. So that's what you see, all these sort of assembled boxes. They vary between open porches for those tenants and enclosed spaces. Those 2 villagey balconies that extend out over are just a little bit, the idea is really to connect it to the community, literally, and meaning that so they kind of poke in and out. And that's what we were trying to do here. There are a couple other good views, but unfortunately, I don't know if we have those here. Are they? Okay. The materials we're still working on, right? So the thinking is, like a patinaed copper metal panel. We're doing perforated metal. We've been working with bird-friendly Evanston on bird strategies. So the perforated metal is a substitute for what you might see as glass railings, typically. And the perforated metal is a way to kind of connect the massing and the openness of the building, meaning that there's more of a transition between a wall and a balcony. And then you can sort of see with the balconies kind of poking in and out, they kind of create some shadow and just definition, more definition that you might get for the building. Michael had mentioned that the building itself is set back 7 feet from our property line, and that's at the first 2 floors. And then at the levels 3 and 4, they start projecting out. And it's not an even projection. It's some of the balcony components project out and some stay back at that 7-foot depth.
So how far out does because it looks like the top floor is the furthest out, am I correct?
So other than those 2 rogue balconies that are on the 4th floor, nothing comes past the property line.
Okay.
So some of these units are on the property line, but there's a lot of play on that facade that there's.
So what actually crosses over the property line? Michael had mentioned something about a right-of-way encroachment.
You can see that one box that's, okay, we'll call it aggressively poking out. That box, that is basically a metal enclosure for a balcony. It's open space. It's not enclosed apartment space. It's someone to kind of hang out and have coffee.
And how big roughly is, because it looks it's
How
hard
far
to tell. It's hard to tell, but it looks like it's a fairly small.
If we can go to the floor plans, I think might show this a little bit better. Yeah, so here you can sort of see there are 2 of them, and you can see that they're projecting out. My estimation is that that's 5 to 6 feet.
And how far is that into the right-of-way, roughly?
They're projecting out
Okay.
5 to 6 feet beyond the property line.
Into the right-of-way?
That's right.
Okay.
And you can also see here, too, how, as Michael had mentioned, the building on the north and south sides is set back 5 feet off of those property lines.
Right.
So that essentially goes over the top to the edge of the sidewalk then? Is
Those
it-
balconies? Yeah, no, it's over the right-of-way. You're going to look up and see the bottom of a balcony.
From the street or
Yeah,
from the?
From the sidewalk,
From
yeah.
the
No,
sidewalk.
It's not that bad. Okay.
And what is the base of that? Is it a concrete base for those balconies?
So it's most likely metal. It's going to be a metal
But
frame.
it'll be a solid, so it won't be graded, so like if people spill things, it's not
That's
going
right.
to be dripping down onto people.
That's
or
right.
anything.
These balconies are meant to be little homes, and that the underside is the same as the top, so that they're all clad in that same material.
Okay.
While I'm here, I'm happy to go through the first floor. That's a little bit more complicated, if that's of any help.
Yeah, actually, before you do that, could you talk about the mechanical screening? Because it's not on these drawings, right? I mean, the mechanical is shown, but what are you doing? What's the material? How high is it? How close to the property line?
Well, we know we have mechanical equipment on the roof.
How tall is it?
So,
Are they condensers? Are they cooling towers?
no. So these are all just straightforward residential furnace systems. So these are condensers, much like we all have in our backyards.
they're short.
So they're
short.
2 ton, yeah, right? And so they will be enclosed. To be perfectly honest, that's something I think we have to work out. But it might be helpful if we can see that roof plan. You know, there was a discussion about the height of the building. That 81-foot height is to the very top of the building. So those are the screens that provides trellis, the trellis components that provide sort of sun screening for the roof deck itself. The actual top of the roof, where people are going to be, is more like 62 feet. At the top of the plan, just beyond that top stair, you'll see a dog park, so it's a place to walk your dog. And then there's just kind of different spaces, seating areas, kitchen space. Some of them are open, some of them are covered. There'll be some green roof here.
And where are the condensers?
Right,
Where?
right. We don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So what is the
condensers, I can add a little to that, in that they won't be up on the top, we'll call it the trellis level, right, the top of the building. The components, the mechanical components will be at the roof level.
Okay. Okay.
So what is the difference between the roof height you're saying is at 61.5, am I correct?
Correct.
And the overall height is 80.5?
Correct.
So with my rudimentary math, I come up with 19 feet roughly?
Right.
So what is
That height.
that 19 feet?
So if we haven't, what you're actually seeing, it's the topmost covered piece. It's a gate, if you will, for this site. It comes up much higher in the building, and it's really just in a shade screen detail. So that comes up higher than everything else, and that accounts for the 19 feet.
And what is that material? Is that the same
It's
concrete
also
all?
the same metal panel as well. That's right, clad on the inside, the top. So it has some mass to it, so it's a solid component. As is this trellis here that you sort of see. Imagine that flat plane where there are these holes cut into it to allow sun and trees to grow up through.
I have a question for staff, I think, and probably neither one of you can answer because it's probably a public works question. We're doing this streetscape for Chicago Avenue. what is the timing of that in relation to this? And how will, obviously if we have a nice streetscape and then we start having a bunch of construction equipment coming down Chicago Avenue on our nice new streetscape, is there a plan? I know that there was a plan for $15,000 or something like that to be put in there, but is that really going to just recoup any damages that are being done to our new streetscape, or is that above and beyond for improvements to our streetscape? And like I said, you may not be able to answer that because that's a Public Works
You're right,
potentially
I
question.
don't have the answers to that. I don't know what the timing is on the streetscape project, and I don't even know what the final details will be. I just know every conversation that we've had with the applicant and Public Works has been to make sure that they're aware that this is going on, to make sure that there's coordination that's happening now and that will need to happen in the future.
Yeah, because the Evergreen project on Howard has kind of somewhat worked around, or the streetscape has somewhat worked around them because they're so closely running together on their timelines, but I don't know how this will work in relation to that.
But once we get to a plan where once we get to the point where they've submitted a building permit, and now it's the nitty-gritty details of the construction details.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it as, if we're saying there's a $15,000 benefit provided to the city, is that really a benefit if $18,000 worth of damage was done? And so that's all I'm trying to clear out, is that really a benefit?
I think, generally speaking, if there is some damage that is done to the city's right-of-way or the city's property, so to speak, that has to be corrected or improved, just regardless of whatever public benefit may or may not be provided. So I think that would be separate.
Right, I just don't
From
want
that
us to start having
additional-
to patch something that's brand new, because then all of a
Right.
sudden you're patching something
Yeah,
that is brand
I
new.
know they're in the planning stages because they've asked me about some other projects along Chicago Avenue and their timing, but yeah, we don't have a set timeline just yet.
All right,
And Commissioner, if I could just add to it, that exact point came up during our conversation, our meeting with Dapper, and where we had kind of left off was, as Michael said, coordinating our improvements and any type of, whether it's underground infrastructure connections, like we said, to the water mains, that we would basically hold our section off of any kind of improvements, again, assuming that we're diligently pursuing our permit. So for that exact reason, that we don't tear up something that was just put in. We were hoping to benefit, as part of the community benefit, our plan calls for streetscape improvements on the inside of our property and along the general public right-of-way. It's a narrower sidewalk. However, again, just to be clear, the idea was to coordinate that very specifically with Public Works to make sure that, again, we're not tearing up new sidewalk or new street surfaces to then have to repair it ourselves. Because I think, as Ms. Jones said, we'd be responsible for repairing anything all over the public way.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Sorry, one more question for our architect. Sorry. As we look at the plan, so you have your balcony protruding into the right-of-way over the sidewalk. If you had a little more setback from the sidewalk, could you keep some clearance there so folks don't feel as if they're passing under anything? I'm worried about two things, just the sense that you're walking down a canyon on Chicago Avenue at that point with things closing in on you, and then just, I don't know if there's anything like water, rainwater, or anything that would come off that element onto the sidewalk and onto pedestrians.
I fully understand. I think that what I would rather not do is sacrifice the rest of the building for what are in fact are two balconies. And if it was decided that the balcony cantilever is fine, but maybe it's not worth all of that you get from it, then it's something that we can certainly consider relooking at.
Just to make a comment on that, There's a building on Halsted Street in Chicago that all the balconies hang over the property line. And it's raised because there's retail on the ground floor. And I have to say that you don't really perceive it. And that's all the balconies. This is just two.
Right.
So I
At the fourth floor.
yeah, up at the fourth floor. So I personally don't think there would be much of a, whatever you're saying, oppression or feeling of interference with your view.
And I can get that. I think it's just a question in this location, it's going to seem not quite in keeping with what folks are used to in the character, that's all.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Mr. Architect, you said you were going to go through the ground floor, because I have a question on the ground.
Yes, I'm happy
ground.
to.
Okay.
My name's Bill Rodenhornoff, by the way. Okay, so the floor plan that you see on the left is the lower level. That space to the top is stormwater retention. So we're providing that on site, of course. And that occupies part of the ramp area. And then, so the entry and loading is all at the north end of the site. The ramp takes you down, and you can sort of see how the parking works. We have 3 handicap spaces, 58 total parking spaces. The lower level, for the most part, is primarily parking. There are some mechanical equipment rooms down there, but for the most part, it's parking. And then on the first floor, as I said, you have the loading. So the site is landlocked. There's no other way for us to enter this building except off of Chicago. And so we've chosen to do that stuff all in the same place, that stuff being loading and parking entrance. And so the parking is just south of that parking entrance. It's all set back, I believe it's 21 feet from the lot line itself. All of the loading, that is the space that's configured for loading, is inside the building. So we're not looking to use that outside footprint. The loading space itself is more generous than that footprint. So we're not just providing a 35 by 10 foot room. It's a much bigger room. So, you could imagine that 2 small panel vans could park in here. So the thinking is it's a little bit oversized for, that use as needed. Bike storage also happens up here. And then that pink space that runs along the lot line itself is that retail space that Nick mentioned. It's designed such that it can be divided up into numerous smaller retail, or, as Nick mentioned, one larger retail space. The purple areas are the live work. There's a couple off the street there, and then they have the ones in the back have their own courtyard. They're, as Nick mentioned, maybe they're, attorneys who are working from remotely, an accountant, but, maybe also a painter, a jewelry maker, people who live there but also spend a portion of their space making a living. And then the actual residential entrance is at the opposite side, so on the south part of the site. So it has all those sort of residential things. There's a lobby, there's mail, packages are all delivered there. And then there are 2 sets of elevators. Sorry, 2 elevators, not 2 sets. There is a trash chute for the entire building that'll do both recycled and regular garbage. And that's all positioned up by the loading space up in at that northern stair core.
I have a quick question on elevators. I don't know this, since I'm not an architect. Is 2 elevators a sufficient number for this if you have people moving in and out where you're shutting one down potentially? So
they said earlier that you just have to schedule the moves.
Right, yeah, I just didn't know if taking one out for 116 units would be impactful or not.
Taking one elevator out?
So, no, if you scheduled one off
Oh, I see.
and you're only able to use one,
But you wouldn't do it during rush hours, so you do it in the middle of the day. You'd schedule these move-ins during the middle of the day. when you
right,
wouldn't
yeah,
do
like I
that.
said, I don't know about this because I don't
Yeah,
live
I
in a
think two
high-rise, never
elevators is
have.
pretty typical
Just
for a
kind of
building this
a
size.
quick question on that.
Yeah,
For
I
for
would say.
116 units, two would be more than sufficient.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's a size, the bigger, the elevators can be bigger than
Right.
your so typical one.
I think, we haven't talked about parking in terms of this variance you're asking for. And I think that's probably the biggest issue with the neighborhood. And so I guess maybe this is first a question for staff. Staff thought that this was, even though it was below what was required, it was adequate for the location, for this building in a TOD area, that number, even though it was below what was required, was adequate. Now, how did you come up with that thought?
You're correct. Staff feels the number is adequate to serve the number of dwelling units in the retail space, primarily because this location is very well suited in a very rich public transit corridor. And so while not everyone's going to be using transit and some people will be parking, the fact that it is within that transit corridor reduces the demand for parking. There are
Theoretically, I get that. But I'm wondering, does staff have any other data of other buildings and what the actual usage is to sort of come to this conclusion on a numbers basis? I'm just saying, your opinion, I understand, and generally I understand, but is there any other data that tells you that this is going to be okay?
I think the cities in the last few years have been trying to encourage less parking, and I think trying to maintain an overall ratio that this building has, about half of the dwelling units, parking for about half the number of dwelling units. So I think the ratio is within what the city has been trying to encourage or maintain.
Concern of the neighbors is obviously that people that you don't think will have cars, and they will park in the neighborhood, and there's not enough spaces in the neighborhood for these people. So that's the concern. So it seems like we Evanston should have some data on other buildings that we've granted exceptions on the parking to, and how they're working out. Because that would be not every neighborhood is the same, I understand that, but that would still be a good information for the neighborhoods to have, I think.
So I think some commissioners may recall, we've actually had a couple of buildings come back to this body to get permission to have a reduction in the amount of required parking for their units. I know one in particular was approved some time ago and was at about one space per unit, and they reduced theirs significantly.
Was that the one on Emerson?
It was E2, so on Emerson. So there was that one, and then also 811 Emerson recently came back to do something similar. Now, those are closer to Northwestern's campus, but there's still a lot of the concern there with students having vehicles, and a lot of the residents in that area also having vehicles. So there are instances where there are buildings that are seen to be overparked. I don't know that we've had something similar happen to the buildings in this particular area. I also think some of those might also be condo buildings, so we don't necessarily have that.
What I'm saying, though, is that we're not talking about 1-to-1. We're talking about a lot less than 1-to-1. And is that how much less is appropriate? That's the question. And I think we all have the same opinion on less parking, especially for buildings that are near transit. But what data do we have on that? I just think it would be a good idea. I'd love to see something like that. Just a list of projects in what they have and what was approved and, whether they're, especially in TOD areas. I also, on this topic, I know that in Chicago, if you are, and Chicago is in Evanston, I'm not saying that, but just as another example, in Chicago, if you are a TOD and you get your alderman to approve it, you can actually have zero parking, zero. Now, I don't know if projects do have zero parking, but I know for a fact that some of the projects in TOD areas in Chicago have very minimal parking, and they're fine, whatever that's worth.
If I could just add to that, so a lot of our zoning practices in Chicago, when it's a transit-oriented development site is defined by the Chicago ordinances, there's an automatic 50% parking ratio reduction. We reworked and retooled our design for this building, again, acknowledging that Evanston's not Chicago, but to at least maintain that 50% threshold. So in Chicago, if you go below a 50% threshold, you either need aldermanic city council approval or approval from the zoning board of appeals. Again, separate processes, but the starting point is 50%, and that's where we really aimed to get on this project. And still, anecdotally, I've worked with MCZ development for almost a decade now. We have multiple examples of buildings that are in that, call it 50 to 100 unit range, so similar size, and often half of the parking provided is unused, so it would be a quarter. I think what we're expecting is maybe 25 to 26 of the spaces will actually be used, and then we actually talked with the colleagues at Dapper to maybe even make some of those spaces available for some of the other residents in the area generally, if that's a benefit that can be provided. So our expectation or projection, call it somewhere between 25 and 30 cars, would actually be parked on site regularly.
I have a couple of questions, again, related to parking. I see both with the loading dock and the parking garage, there are doors. And so the first question is, can you kind of explain where the spaces for retail are those for employees? It doesn't look like how would the public access that,
Right. So
or would they?
And Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, I think because this is going to be a self-managed building, we'll be able to coordinate with retailers and the employees as to whether or not there is available parking within the building to be used by those employees. We also have discussed allowing a certain segment of the spaces right at the entry point to the garage to be used by retail customers if they choose to actually go into the building. Again, some of that we have to see what the market is and see how the usage rates actually are when the building's delivered. But those are some preliminary ideas and concepts that we've already had some background conversations with staff about and how to manage that appropriately. So I don't know if I'm giving you a clear answer, but it's on our mind, and we thought, again, so that there isn't an interference with the tenants of the building, the residential tenants, and members of the public using those spaces, to try and section off a number of spaces for retail use only.
That the public could access.
Correct. If
Because
needed.
right now,
inside the garage, yes.
okay. And then for the loading dock, if you're showing garage doors, you've got garbage will have to be picked up, the move in, move out. And what are the hours for the management? Or will they be on site during the day? How will that work?
Do you want to answer that?
So we have a fully integrated company, so management, development. So, yeah, we have 24-hour management crews that are available in case of emergencies, but we don't plan on having any management on site. So.
In that case, how do you handle the deliveries for people move in, move out? Would you have them on site
So during business hours, property managers schedule, yeah, they make site visits, they're on site during certain
Okay,
instances.
I'm just kind of asking how the garage would be, how the garbage trucks would access the loading dock to pick up the garbage if no one's on site.
So the garbage companies have access to our building, they'll have access to the garbage rooms, and so that's not an issue. We've handled that many times before in all of our buildings. One more thing I want to add about parking is that currently there's 2 curb cuts on Chicago Avenue with the dealership. We're removing one of them, so that will add hopefully a few spaces to the street parking as well. Maybe 1 or 2 spaces.
Would you have an engineer on site for 24/7 or just for the working hours, or how would that
Yeah,
work?
so the building engineer would be there during normal hours. Currently, we don't have plans to have someone there 24/7, but
All right, and no leasing office per se, or anything like that?
we're probably going to have some kind of small leasing office on site.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to have like a storage locker room or anything like that? I don't see anything like that on the,
So we typically do that in the garages, so typically in front of the parking spaces. We add some storage lockers or cages that would be available for tenants.
okay, so where are you placing those in the garage? Because the garage looks pretty tight to me.
Yeah, so they would be in front of the spaces is how we've typically handled that in the past.
Okay. So you're putting a storage locker in that space as well?
So, I mean, it's something that we haven't worked out yet. We're looking into it, but that's how we've handled it in the past with some of our buildings, so we'll definitely look into that, and we can get back to you on the details of that.
It couldn't occupy the parking space, so
It would have to be in front.
if you're talking that it's mounted on the wall in front, so that the car can still pull in, that might be feasible, but it still needs to be a space that will be
Commissioner Halleck?
Just a couple more. Let's see. Yeah, in the report, in the staff report, there was a comment about the clearance in the loading docks, 14-foot clear, which is normal, and it wasn't 14-foot clear if you considered I guess it was a rolling door or something. So what is it?
I believe it's actually 14'6".
Oh, it is clear.
Michael has the elevation there. He will,
The door itself is not
to the underside of the floor is 14'6". So the door itself is 14 feet tall. So there's a 6-inch space between the top of the door and the underside of the floor.
Oh, so it's not. It's one of these.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the intention is it's a etched glass door, so, it doesn't look like your typical dumb garage door, that it, almost has like a retail feel to it and having it be glass and metal. But it's a rolling door.
And then I have a question for staff on these public improvements. They mentioned the 20 to 30,000 was I don't know, typical of other projects of this size. Do you guys have any data on that? Is that true, that is what we expect from projects like this, or do we expect more? Do we know?
That list came specifically from the Public Works Agency. That was the list that they gave us. And
No, I understand that that's a wish list, but
Yeah.
again, it seems like it would be a nice thing to have data on different projects and what the public improvements were and how much they're worth, what the size of the project was, just a simple, Because otherwise, every project comes in here and we have no idea whether it's appropriate or not.
Right, okay.
Yeah, I think that's some information that we can pull together. Generally speaking, those prices match what I have seen in the past. They're not always going to be exactly the same, depending on the location and exactly what is being done and what equipment may be needed, if it's like a countdown timer or something along those lines. But that information can be pulled.
And I think just as a matter of policy, the public benefits really ought to relate to the project being built. So I think that things like the streetscape enhancements, the sidewalk improvements, those sorts of things, and frankly, I think adding the extra 6 or 7 feet, the setting back the sidewalk, is going to be very helpful in that location. That's kind of why I'm not sure how I feel about, the contribution to the park improvements, nice as that is. I think that, I think just as a matter of course, I think for projects, we ought to be looking at public benefits that are specifically tied to the project. Any other questions from commissioners for either the applicant or? Okay. Nothing else right now? Okay, at this point, we have members of the public who I believe would like to speak. We have Jan Stein, and are you going to speak together?
Can we, is that?
Yeah, I think so, since there are only two of you. And what I would suggest, we have a 2-minute time limit usually, but we've combined kind of questions and testimony. So what I would like to do is, if you have questions of either the applicant or staff, if you ask the questions first, and we'll get the answers, and then if you have comments you'd like to make about the project generally, then we can do that.
Well, may I have a question to start? Just a question for staff. Okay, we live on this street. Most people on our street do not have garages. Most of the people have at least 1, maybe 2 cars. We're around the corner from that building. So you've reduced the number of parking spaces, and unless you're going to not allow people to move in there, they're going to end up parking on our street. And then where do we park? I mean, we have a 90-year-old woman on our street. We have a disabled guy. I've got leg and I need to park in front of our house. And so the question is, do you have plans to address that so that we can continue to park on our own street? Even now, when they have the big events on Dempster Street, like before COVID, they would have District 65 would do an art fair up there and things like that. Then our street's even difficult to park on then. We have, and if we've got another building. My question is, what do we do?
I've got a question related to that. Do you have resident-only parking in your neighborhood or no?
No.
Can I say what
Sure.
I think is the main issue here?
Certainly.
So what jumped out at us while we're here, somebody at some point in history decided that the appropriate numbers for this location are 78 residences and 75 parking spaces, approximately 1 space per unit. Sounds very reasonable to me. Suddenly you're adding 50% to the number of units and cutting the parking spaces, so there's just a 50%. To me, it seems like an extraordinary ask, an extraordinary, movement of the goalposts here. Is this typical when people come before the commission to violate the standards so radically? I respectfully, Mr. Rogers, you say only 25 spaces will be used for 116 units. That just seems hard to believe. Most people have cars.
Did I make that statement?
You said you expected 25.
No, the attorney.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't think I made that statement, but maybe I did. I just wanted to clarify.
Okay, yeah, that just seems I mean, I'm not an architect or a city planner, but that just seems absurd.
And-
Only a quarter of the people would use parking.
And if they do this beautiful streetscape, you're not adding parking necessarily, you're subtracting it, because you're getting all these beautiful bike lanes, and you're getting the buses, and then I'm like, oh, so there's less parking on Chicago Avenue, that even pushes them over to our street even more.
Yeah, so I guess I'm asking, is this typical to give a developer that much leeway over some standards that were set for what I assume are good reasons? I mean, this is-
So technically speaking, when we look at planned developments, we have the base zoning. So that is essentially what could be built by right. Within the code, an applicant is able to apply for either variances or site development allowances, depending on the size of the project. So they are within their right to pursue going above and beyond to a certain extent, because there is a limit on those site development allowances as well. So it's all within the code. It doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be passed, because that is the decision of City Council. They are the final determining body. But it is something that can occur. And also, more recently with our inclusionary housing ordinance, the updates to that, if on-site affordable units are provided, then that can provide some additional bonuses. So there are ways that by code, some additional units, size, et cetera, can be permitted if, again, council decides to do so.
And with some of the larger developments that have happened over the last really 10 years or so that have provided additional parking, many of those parking garages are not full. So people are tending to have fewer cars. And one of the questions, and in certain areas where there is resident-only parking, provisions have been made that, or conditions have been applied to the developments where the tenants of those buildings cannot get resident-only parking permits because, so that they will actually lease parking spaces within their buildings. So that is a question, particularly in areas like yours where there is not resident-only parking. I think in a recent development, which was in a similar circumstance, we encouraged residents to talk to their alderman about establishing a resident-only parking district, which tends to free up, or at least give residents of the street a fighting chance to find parking, because that is a concern of ours as well.
This might be obtuse thinking, but what are the sizes of the studio? There 96 out of 116 units are studios and one-bedrooms, small units relatively. What are the sizes of those units? I'll tell you where I'm going in a second.
I mean, they average between 5 and maybe 650 to 700.
Could
That's
you,
the-
Come to the microphone.
yeah.
That's the one-bedroom or what?
So the studios and one-bedroom range in size from approximately 500 square feet to approximately 700 square feet. Some of the larger ones are 725, but in that general range.
Okay, so they're actually normal-sized studios and one-bedrooms. Where I was going, and I don't think it really applies, is that the trend has been to smaller units, and the reason why is because people can't afford the rents for larger units. And so those people that opt for studios and one-bedrooms, they're opting for those smaller units because they have to, because, and statistically, I know other projects that could prove this out, that those people will not have cars because they can't afford it. They can only afford the small unit. Now, you're not a super small unit. 700 is a pretty good size for a one-bedroom, and then 5, 6, whatever, it's for a studio. But I think generally that thinking applies.
And absolutely, and I think in our case, this is positioned as a rental building. We're not anticipating, again, that high volume of 2 cars per unit, 2 cars per household. That just doesn't seem to be the market. I think it's more in line with your analysis that a one-bedroom or studio is occupied by a single person, maybe they don't have the funds to have a car as well, they don't want to pay insurance. That's why they're moving to a location like this, because of its close proximity to public transportation, to be able to get downtown Chicago or further up north to work, and that's part of, frankly, the sale of the building. The allure of the building is that it offers that option.
I understand, and I, again, back to my earlier point about it'd be nice if we had some data on these buildings, because I totally appreciate a resident coming in and saying, hey, I'm afraid we're going to have a problem. Well, you don't know you're going to have a problem, you're just afraid you're going to have a problem, but if the experience of other neighborhoods that have new buildings built in their neighborhood would be helpful, to say, well, this was done here and it wasn't a problem, or it was a problem, and, I think that would be helpful.
And just a point to add to that, I think that's a great idea, but also I think what I would want to know is the occupancy rates. So the new condos across the street from some of my friends, it doesn't look like there are many people living there, so they don't have a parking issue yet. But as the residences increase, it would be interesting to know what happens. So I support your idea, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that the units are small. I understand that we're not likely to get 2 cars per unit, so thank you for that clarification. So I guess we've made our point, and thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for coming. All right. So I think with that, does petitioner and staff have anything else to add at this point? All right, then I think we're...
Before we close the record, Madam Chair, I'd like to get a feel from my fellow commissioners. We seem to have a lot of information that's still kind of outstanding, and I don't know how everybody else feels about that. We've heard, well, the mechanical will be addressed later. Well, the storage lockers will be addressed later. Well, the leasing office space may be addressed later. And I feel fairly uncomfortable without knowing what's going on with some of those things, because that will directly impact what happens with this building. And if things are not manageable based on what they come up with for solutions there, is that something that we're comfortable just letting staff deal with, council deal with?
I personally don't, my opinion, you're asking our opinion, my opinion is that the mechanical isn't an issue, because these are low units. They're 3 foot tall or something. They're not.
Right, but you have 116 of them.
Yes, and they will find a place on the roof. And I just don't, okay, and the storage is, to me, that's an internal issue, how they manage that. There's a lot of buildings that don't have additional storage. I don't think, I would not hold up this vote personally for that information. That's just my opinion.
I don't know that I would hold it up either, but I think those are good questions, and I think they're concerns. And I think that has to be identified, along with any other concerns we have regarding parking or what else is out there. I am concerned about the screening of the mechanical units, only because you'd like to see a real strategy for that, because it does have an impact on the neighborhood. It's a very strong one.
And if I can speak specifically to that, Bill did describe that the mechanicals are, again, of the lower height, but also on what would be the true roof of the building. And then there's that 19-foot coverage that's also part of the screening component. So correct, it has not been spelled out in detail, but the idea or the concept is to make sure that those units are screened properly and that there is infrastructure on the top of the building to do just that. And it, in this case, is going to serve multiple uses, but it's something that I would just hope that the Plan Commission keeps in mind, that the idea, the intent is to have those mechanicals at, I think Bill said, the 61-foot height, and then still have that 19-foot screen above.
And my concern is not necessarily with the screening of them. My concern is more so with the footprint of them.
Understood.
That you have 116 plus the mechanical for the building itself, and how much square footage do you have up there when you take into account your dog park and your all the other amenities that you're putting up on the roof.
Right, no, completely understood. And I think, I just, again, I'd ask the commission to keep in mind that that is part of the programming for that 61-foot height elevation with the other improvements considered around it or above it as well.
And I'm not proposing holding this up necessarily. I'm just saying that if we move it forward, I think we need to say, here are things we are concerned with. Please take a look at these as they move further down the path.
If someone came in with a similar building and they had no amenities on the roof, and the entire roof was mechanical, because that may happen, they may have reduced, when they lay this out, what the result may be that they have less area for their amenity.
Right. But, knowing that there will not be amenities on the roof will affect the leasability, will affect what goes on in the rest of the building. So, again, I'm not proposing to hold this up. I'm just saying that I think we need to say, as it moves forward, here are some concerns we have, and we think really sort of need to be addressed earlier on, as opposed to a final sign-off from DAPR or something like that.
Yeah. I think that one of the things that, we've handled these in plan developments in the past is there's a set of recommendations, and if there are specific, I have a couple of additions for the recommendations, one of which a construction management plan, because I'm particularly concerned about how the construction is going to happen, given that this is there's no alley. All the construction is going to have to happen off of Chicago Avenue. And I think that we need to be more specific in terms of the waste management plan to include recycling and composting. And then we also need to deal with hours of operation, because you don't want the garbage trucks picking up garbage during rush hour, for example, along with the deliveries and the move-in, move-out. So I think that would be the place, if you have specific things you're concerned about, we ought to add to that list of recommendations that will be attached to this going forward to the city council.
To interject, typically the construction management plan is added to the ordinance that is required before staff approves any building permits, because you need to know the routes for construction vehicles, et cetera, and just the timing, and especially given the proposed project, that would be a major part of this particular plan as well. So just to answer that would be a whole different discussion that staff looks at before approving.
Yeah, but I just think it's important that we acknowledge that there should be, as the Plan Commission sends this off to the city council, I don't think it hurts for us to add that. And, while there is not a resident parking permit program in that area, I think also it would be helpful as a matter of policy to say if one isn't acted, these units would not be eligible for resident permits.
I have a bit of an issue with that, and simply the fact that if I'm a renter in this building and I have a guest who comes and stays and they've driven in from Indianapolis, where do I ask them to park? That creates a bit of an issue for something like that. So that's the only reason I'm opposed to making it excluding a building from resident-only parking. I understand the impact it could, the impact it can have on the neighbors, but I also want to be cognizant of the impact it can have on the people who actually live in this building, because this is their home.
Right.
And they should be treated with the respect of this being their home.
Although if there is sufficient parking spaces in the building, even if the tenant may not have a car, may not be leasing them, I'm sure that there could be some mechanism worked out where they could get a permit.
Right. But
So I think there's a way
I
to
would
do
rather
that.
respond to the impact as opposed to shutting it down before an impact, a possibly non-existent impact occurs.
All right, are we ready now to close testimony and public hearing and have our deliberations? Okay, I think, do we start with the standards? Is that, or should we? You know, staff was kind enough to put them in our memo.
By the way, I thought that was really good, that staff went through the standards and gave their opinion on it. I thought, I hope that in future projects you do that staff does that. I thought it was great.
Okay, so let's go through the special use standards. It's one of the special uses specifically listed in the zoning ordinance that is satisfied. It is in keeping with the purposes and policies of the adopted comprehensive general plan and the zoning ordinance as amended from time to time. I would say satisfied. It will not cause a negative cumulative effect when its effect is considered in conjunction with the cumulative effect of various special uses of all types on the immediate neighborhood and the effect of the proposed type of special use upon the city as a whole. Say satisfied. It does not interfere with or diminish the value of property in the neighborhood. Satisfied. It can be adequately served by public facilities and services. There is a question there in terms of the water main, I think, is the only one, but presumably that will be worked out by staff.
But I think you have to indicate there's a question on
Yeah,
that.
I think there's a question about that. Is it not satisfied? I mean, it will have to be when it's approved.
I would say it's satisfied, and we trust our Public Works Department that if electrical, because I'm guessing they'll probably have to pull some new electrical possibly for this unit, for this building as well as the water. So I would trust the Public Works Department to make that adjustment as necessary.
Okay. It does not cause undue traffic congestion. I think that with the restrictions on the hours of deliveries and trash pickup and the like, I think we can assume that's satisfied. It preserves significant historical and architectural resources. That's not applicable. It preserves significant natural and environmental features. It's either not applicable or, you know, working with the bird-friendly design, I think we could say satisfied. It complies with all other applicable regulations of the district in which it is located and other applicable ordinances, except to the extent that such regulation has been modified through the plan development process or the grant of a variation. I would say satisfied. Okay. All right, I get to read this one. Standards for plan developments. As a special use, plan development involves such special considerations of the public interest that it shall be required to adhere to the specific plan development standards established in the zoning district in which it is located. Compliance with the standards shall govern the recommendations of the Plan Commission applicable to a plan development and the action of the City Council in order to ensure that an approved plan development is in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance. The Plan Commission shall not recommend approval of, nor shall the City Council approve a plan development unless each shall determine based on written findings of fact that the plan development satisfies the specific standards established in the zoning district in which the plan development is located. I'd say satisfied? All right. All right. And standards and guidelines for plan developments in the C1A district. Each plan development shall be compatible with the surrounding development and not be of such a nature and height, bulk, or scale as to exercise any influence contrary to the purposes and intent of the zoning ordinance as set forth in section 6-1-2, purpose and intent. I think that because it does not, exceed the allowable development allowances, this is satisfied. Each plan development shall be compatible with and implement the comprehensive general plan as amended. Any adopted land use or urban design plan specific to the area, this zoning ordinance, and any other pertinent city planning and development policies, particularly in terms of land use intensity, housing, preservation, environmental, traffic, impact, and parking. Impact on schools, public services and facilities, essential character of the business district, the surrounding residential neighborhoods, and abutting residential lots, neighborhood planning, commercial district planning, and economic development goals and policies, particularly those of specific adopted plans for individual business districts, conservation of the taxable value of land and buildings throughout the city, and retention of taxable land on the tax rolls. I'd say that is satisfied. Commissioner Westerberg, you have a comment?
I'm probably in the minority. I am in the minority on this. I do think there can be an impact with this development on the neighborhood in terms of parking, but I also have no evidence or hard data to say that it necessarily would be. I just think it is a concern. I personally have a concern in the way the development is right up against the public right-of-way and actually, coming into it with the balconies. I understand the idea. I think it's an interesting and creative one. I just think at that location, it doesn't really help preserve the impact or the feel of the neighborhood. Even though that is a commercial street, there are residential streets surrounding it. So that would be my comment.
Okay. All right.
If I could ask Commissioner Westerberg just a quick question. Do you feel like there was some discussion about whether those balconies were a make or break? Is this a make or break for you, or is it a concern? Is it something?
I think for me it is a make or break. I don't think there's any reason to push the development further into the public right-of-way. Again, understanding the nature of the architecture, creative process, I get it. I am just thinking of the impact on that street and on that particular section of the street. I have no objection to a very contemporary design at that point. I just think it needs to be respectful for the streetscape itself.
All right. Each plan development shall be completed within 2 years of the issuance of the special use permit for the plan development. If extensive or staged development is approved as part of the plan development, however, the 2-year requirement may be extended to provide for a more reasonable time schedule. The expanded time schedule shall be adopted as part of the plan development and so noted on the special use permit for plan development. I think that at this point, we didn't get into timing on your construction, but I would say it's either not applicable at this point. No special use permit for a plan development shall be valid for a period longer than 1 year unless a building permit is issued and construction is actually begun within that period and is diligently pursued to completion. The City Council, however, for good cause shown, extend the 1 year period for such time as it shall determine without further hearing before the Plan Commission. The City Council may, at its sole discretion, place conditions on the extension in order to assure the plan development is diligently pursued to its completion. Again, we didn't address the specific timing, but I presume that will be addressed in the by the City Council in the plan development ordinance. All landscape treatment within the plan development shall be provided in accordance with the requirements set forth in Chapter 17, Landscaping and Screening, and shown on the required landscape plan submitted as part of the plan development application. I think there was a landscape plan of sorts, although there's not much landscaping when you're occupying the whole site. So I'd say satisfied. For all boundaries of the planned development immediately abutting a residential property, there should be provided a transition landscape strip of at least 10 feet consisting of vegetative screening or decorative walls in accordance with the Manual of Design Guidelines and Chapter 17, Landscaping and Screening. The transition landscape strip and its treatment shall be depicted on the required landscape plan submitted as part of the plan development application. This is not applicable. There are no adjacent residential uses. Walkways developed for planned development shall form a logical, safe, and convenient system for pedestrian access to all project facilities, as well as any off-site destination likely to attract substantial pedestrian traffic. Pedestrian ways shall not be used by other automotive traffic. I think that this is satisfied, particularly since the applicant is proposing providing a wider sidewalk. The location, construction, and operation of parking, loading areas, and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse impacts on residential uses within or adjoining the development, and where possible, provide additional parking beyond that required for the planned development to service the business district in which it is located. I think this is probably not satisfied. You're not providing the required parking spaces, although I think the loading areas and service areas, you're requesting variations from the requirements for those, which, so I think, other commissioners agree with that? Disagree?
I think whether there's an adverse effect is a question.
Okay. All right, and then finally,
So are we saying that standard is or is not met?
I don't believe it's,
Because I think when we place, I think based off of the proposal, that we have some leeway to grant it, to make it met. Because if a standard is not met, we have to deny a project.
I think the key words here are designed to avoid an adverse effect. And
Right.
I
I
don't
think
know
that's-
that we can conclude that there will be an adverse effect.
right.
So
Satisfied?
I just don't know the answer.
Or we can say not
So
applicable.
What's the exact, I can't read that from here, I'm sorry.
All right,
What's
it's-
the exact wording of it?
The location, construction, and operation of parking, loading areas, and service areas shall be designed to avoid adverse effects on residential uses within or adjoining the development, and where possible, provide additional parking beyond that required for the planned development to service the business district in which it is located.
And based on that wording, you would say it's not satisfied. But I don't know that I would necessarily deny the development on that
Right.
basis.
Well, the thing of it is, I mean, it says, because it says that it's the residential units within and adjoining the development.
Right,
So there are no residences adjoining
right.
the property. And obviously, they're creating the parking for their own residents. So I would tend to say that this has been met, and I also think it's a poorly worded standard. When we used to do ZBA, one of ours was a substantial adverse impact. I mean, everything you do will have an impact, and it may be adverse, but is it 5%, 10%, 80%?
Yeah, no, I
I
agree.
think this is referring to, sorry, I think this is referring to a different situation.
Right.
Not the one that we have.
I think it's when you're building next to a residential
Right.
area directly beside, abutting.
Fair enough.
Shall we say satisfied then? Yeah. Okay. And then principal vehicular access point shall be designed to permit smooth traffic flow with controlled turning movements and minimum hazards to vehicular and pedestrian traffic. I would say this is satisfied based on the design. I mean, it's a difficult site to begin with, but
There's only one access point.
yes. The plan development shall provide, if possible, for the underground installation of utilities, including electricity and telephone, both in public ways and private extensions thereof. Provisions shall be made for acceptable design and construction of stormwater facilities, including grading, gutter, piping, treatment of turf, and maintenance of facilities. We have an underground vault for detention, so I would say this is satisfied. For every planned development, there shall be provided a market feasibility statement that shall indicate the consumer market areas for all uses proposed in the development, the population potential of the area and or areas to be served by the uses proposed, and other pertinent information concerning the need or demand for such uses of land. That is satisfied. For every planned development involving 20 dwelling units or more, there shall be provided a traffic circulation impact study that shall show the effect of all proposed uses upon the adjacent and nearby roads and highways. The study shall also show the amount and direction of anticipated traffic flow and clearly describe what road and traffic control improvements might become necessary as a result of the construction of the proposed development. The traffic study was provided. That is satisfied. And the zoning administrator may, at his discretion, require of the applicant additional studies or impact analyses when he determines that a reasonable need for such investigation is indicated. I don't believe any were required, so this would be not applicable. Is that it? Thank you. All right. So, at this point, we have a recommendation for staff to approve the project with a list of recommended items. And I don't think I'll read them unless you would like me to. Do I need to read those into the record?
With the staff report, that's already a part of the record.
Okay. I would like to suggest, do we need a motion first? And then I've got a couple of additions I would like to make, or amended language. What's the best?
Typically, there'd be a motion to approve as presented by staff, and then
we
add additional amendments.
Okay. May we have a motion on the proposal?
I'll move to approve the proposal as presented,
Along with the staff recommendations?
along with the staff recommendations.
I will second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I would like to make the following suggestions with respect to the, no, I think we have to
No, we
amend
have to
this
have
first.
discussion with the amendments.
I would like to suggest that on item 4, which is provide a waste management plan to include recycling and composting, including something, let's see, and composting with hours of operation to minimize traffic impact for number 4.
I would group that together with the deliveries as well.
Yes.
And just to make it that there would be a restriction on trash and deliveries during rush hours to avoid impact where possible on
Yeah.
Chicago Avenue.
Yeah, and it's move in and move out, so it's not even just
Yeah.
deliveries. It's almost really use of the loading dock shall be restricted to non-rush hour hours is kind of where I'm going with that. And then I would like to add a number 11, which is to provide a construction management plan to address really potential traffic impact on Chicago Avenue. So do I have a second for my proposed amendments?
I'm sorry, what was your second one?
The second
I was
one-
writing a note.
Oh, I'm sorry. I want to add number 11 to provide a construction management plan to minimize impact on Chicago Avenue traffic. Let's see, so,
I have a couple other things. I don't know if
Okay.
we want to do it
Yeah, well,
kind of
let's
as a
do it all. We
one
can
big
do-
motion. I would be very interested in having staff provide to City Council Planning and Development some of the questions that Commissioner Halleck was asking about. You know, do we have information on parking for the buildings that we have approved, and how that has impacted those neighborhoods and or that building? I mean, if we have buildings that are drastically scaling back because they aren't being used, that would be nice to know, but also to know if we've seen an increase in problems in these neighborhoods.
I'm not sure that that's specifically related to this development. These recommendations and conditions are specifically related to, I agree that we should be looking at that, but I'm not sure.
I don't know why I can't make that a part of the conditions
Okay.
for this particular
Okay.
development. I mean, we can do it for all of them in the future. And then I don't necessarily need these to be conditions in I won't make these in, but I would love to have the developer look into some of the other questions that came up, just so you're prepared, to address some of the things with the mechanicals, with the leasing office, with storage lockers, things like that. I'm not necessarily going to make that part of my motion. I will trust you to have those ducks in a row by the time you get to the next stage.
Okay.
And then Commissioner Westerberg, I don't know how you feel about the intrusion to the right-of-way, if that's something that you,
I would make the recommendation that the building be further set back so that those balconies are not in the right-of-way, or that the balconies that protrude be removed. But either way, I think the right-of-way along that streetscape should be respected.
and how does everyone else feel about that?
I would agree with that.
So you've grouped all of these into one. That would be the only one that I don't have an issue with, the last one, the balcony issue. The others I would agree with, but I'll go along with it if that's the majority.
I mean, we are recommending, and so if there is a decision at council that that is not an intrusion, that that's something they can live with, obviously they can do that. I'm also happy to make it a separate motion if you want to vote one way or the other on it. Okay. Oops, sorry.
Okay. So do you have all,
I think I've got everything.
the question is, does Megan have everything?
Yeah, I will read them off, and you kind of double check me there on everything. So I would make an amendment to the motion that we prohibit the intrusion of balconies into the right-of-way, that we restrict, and I'm going to call it non-residential traffic, so that will cover off on hopefully all the move-in, move-out, trash, deliveries, everything, be restricted to not occur during rush hour, morning and evening, that a construction plan be put together specifically in coordination with the streetscape plan. Construction management plan, I'm sorry. And that pay particular attention to the streetscape plans that are going on, and that staff provide to City Council Planning and Development Committee a brief summary, doesn't have to be detailed, of similar projects, the status of the parking that they had requested, and any impacts that have been seen in surrounding neighborhoods. Did I hit everything that you had written down?
Yes.
Anybody, did I miss anything? Then that is my motion.
I'll second. Okay, so, so I think we need to move on the amendment first, so we vote on that first.
Correct.
All right. Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Chair Linwall?
Yes. All right, that passes, so now I believe we vote on the main motion.
Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Chair Linwall?
Yes. Okay,
Those motions pass.
thank you. That concludes this item. Thank you, gentlemen. And we still have one item on our agenda. We need to elect a vice chair.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
Because we're supposedly going to merge with the other group, and no one has said, because I've asked, how the leadership of that group is going, that combined group is going to be determined, and I also don't know when that's going to happen. My question is, I think all of this is kind of intertwined, and I'm not against, nominating someone, but is it going to be like for, 1 month or 1 meeting, or where is this all going in terms of leadership of the new group?
So those are very valid questions. I think given the timing for everything and what's been going on currently, we probably would not see a full combination of the two until January of 2022.
Okay.
So electing a vice chair would essentially be for a few months, just in case Chair Linwall is unable to make it. Yeah.
All right.
I'd like to nominate Commissioner Rogers.
Okay. Is that okay with you?
That is fine with me.
Since you're already chair of the zoning committee,
Yes,
so.
that kind of went backwards into this one, I guess.
All right. Commissioner Halleck? Yes. Commissioner Westberg?
Yes.
Chair Linwall?
Yes. Oh, you get to
And
vote, don't you?
Commissioner Rogers?
You get
Yes.
to vote too. All right, I don't think we have any members of the public to comment, so next is adjournment. Do we need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.